Vamos. Okay, welcome to episode 34 of the Chills at Will podcast. I'm thrilled today to have Megan and Jorge Lacera with me today. A little biographical information about this great couple. Artist Jorge Lacera was born in Colombia and grew up in Miami, Florida, drawing in sketchbooks, on napkins, on walls, and anywhere his parents would let him. After graduating with honors from Ringling College of Art and Design, Jorge worked as a visual development and concept artist for major gaming studios and entertainment companies. As a big fan of pop culture, comics, and zombie movies, Jorge rarely saw Latinx kids as the heroes or leads. He is committed to changing that, especially now that he has a son. Jorge is currently helping to create the next chapter in the Bioshock franchise as the associate art director at Cloud Chamber Studios in Montreal, Quebec. Writer Megan Lacera grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, with a book always in her hands. She became a writer and creator of characters and worlds for entertainment companies like American Greetings, Hasbro, and Goldie Blocks, and later formed her own creative company where she creates original content and consults on marketing, social media, and strategic direction for startups and large corporations. After reading many stories to their son, Megan realized that very few books reflect a family like theirs, multicultural, bilingual, funny, and imperfect. She decided to change that by writing her own stories. Megan and Jorge, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor to have you both on the podcast. How did I do on the intro? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that was good.
Yeah, that was great.
That was great.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
It's great to have you. And like I told you, this is the first time I've really done the product. Oh, going the wrong way. The product placement. We'll be talking about this great book in a little bit. And you are calling in from Montreal, Quebec.
That's right.
That's right.
How long have you lived there now?
Oh, we've been here about a little over a year now, right?
Yeah. Just a little bit over a year.
All right. Well, welcome. And Jorge, I'd like to start with you. Growing up in Miami, Florida, did I get that correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your background as far as reading and literature, your language. Did you grow up speaking Spanish and English? What were you reading? What did you gravitate towards as a kid and as an adolescent?
Yeah, so it's also great being here, by the way, Pete. Thanks for having us. So I was born in Colombia. I was born in Barranquilla. And I immigrated. My parents were nice enough to bring me along when I was a year and a half old from Colombia to the United States when we all immigrated. And growing up, I grew up in a predominantly Spanish-speaking household. So English is my second language. And a lot of, I'd always gravitated towards books. I've been told I used to walk around with a Maya the Bee comic book, like very firmly in my grasp as a toddler. So that was always something I liked, looking at pictures and reading. And one of my favorite things growing up was going to the library. And I think at first, I think like a lot of kids that are primarily Spanish speakers, like there's all this, especially when you're growing up in a English dominant cultural kind of environment, like school could be, like you're really, there's a lot of pressure to get into the English stuff. And it doesn't help that a lot of the books that are available in Spanish tend to not be super interesting, frankly, to little boys and all that. So like a lot of those stories are about, I was reading a lot of books about the immigration experience, which is great and really important. But, I'm at the time, there was a couple of major things that happened to me as an adolescent that really influenced the way that I read. One of the things that really happened to me was my cousins I've always been a big influence on me. I have numerous cousins, but there was my dad's sister's side of the family. They had been in the US for a number of years before we arrived. And so they were able to, over the years, collect a bunch of comic books, right? And they would just had one day they just went up into the attic and they came back and they handed me a big grocery bag full of comic books. And that blew my mind. That was the coolest thing ever. And I think as somebody who was learning English, the combination of images and words was really useful and helpful. So being able to make that connection was really great. And then over time, I just continued to, as I got more confident in my English reading ability, it just was like off to the races at that point. I was always reading comic books, always reading books, etc. So, but yeah, I would say that was like a real big pivotal moment, is getting that stack of comics.
So were those particular comics like in particular certain ones, or just comics in general that really drew your interest?
Well, I think there was first of all, I think it was like the right time, when you're a kid, you're watching a lot of TV, and, my parents joke that I like taught myself English by watching Sesame Street. So I watched a lot of Sesame Street, and that was like number one. And then as I got older, you're just watching cartoons and you're soaking in all that stuff. So it was like right as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were big, and He-Man and all that stuff. And then getting a stack of comics, it was like sort of like the next level, because the stories were deeper and longer. But they were particularly Daredevil comics felt like at the time, if you think about it, it's like late 80s, early 90s, Daredevil comics were kind of edgy. And so it was like, whoa, this feels like I shouldn't be reading it, but it's still a comic book. So not now. Now comic books are very much like there's adult comic books in, but at the time it was like starting to change a little bit. So that was a big one. Batman comic books from that period too. There's a run by a writer named Denny O'Neil that was like very influential, and there were some of those sprinkled in there. Some DC stuff, Legion of Superheroes, Superman. That kind of Wolverine. I can go on and on.
Yeah, he can. He really can.
Right.
There was a lot of good stuff in that stack. That stack was actually, they had good taste. There was a lot of really good stuff in that stack of comics. But,
that is so cool. I love that image of you like not letting go of the Amelia the Bee. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Maya the Bee.
Maya the Bee. Pardon me. That's a great image. Did you? I guess this would be a little bit. You'd be more of a teenager then. Did you get into Batman the animated series?
Oh yeah, that was huge. Yeah.
How good was that?
It's the best. It's the best. I would, because of course I was like the first person in my house to properly learn how to use the VCR, right? Like I learned how to record it and like when to set this is like ancient.
Oh yeah.
Set the timer and everything. So I would go to school, I would find out when they were airing, and I would record them, and then I'd watch them later when I came home. And now our son is into them, so that's exciting.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. What did you get into after comic books? As far as what were you reading? Chapter books, etc. Maybe that you were forced to in school and you liked, or stuff that you read on your own.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think one of the things that my parents never really did any gatekeeping regarding any of the reading that I read. They just let me read whatever I gravitated towards. So like some of the early stuff additional to comic books that I would read, my dad actually had a lot of these old weird, there's just a period of time in like the 70s in Central and South America where everything's like occult and supernatural. So there's all these like UFO books and stuff like that. And he had all these like books about like weird phenomena that I like loved. Those were in Spanish. And there were ones that were like magazines about it that were also in Spanish. So I was really into those. And then on my own personal reading, I kind of skipped chapter books. I think the closest thing to, I would read I'm still into Star Wars. So I'd read like the Star Wars novelizations were big ones that were like accessible. Then that led sort of to like the art of books, which had some words, but they're mostly pictures. And as somebody that was drawing all the time, I gravitated. So it's anything with a lot of visuals in it. That was a big draw for me. But then I think in elementary school, I somehow got a copy of Animal Farm, and that book moved away. And that became like my favorite sort of book. And then it's kind of hard once you read that book and comprehend it and get it to like go to chapter books or other books. So I was like, sort of at that point, I'm like reading Orwell and stuff. So it was weird.
Right. So you skipped pretty far. Yeah. All of a sudden you're reading about communism in an allegorical form, and wow. Okay.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was my favorite book for a long time, because I think at first I'm like, oh, it's the idea of like talking animals was appealing. And then the more the subtext starts becoming more and more apparent in my mind, I think it just sort of kept continuously blowing my mind as the more and more I read it. Then, in high school, all the stuff that they have you read in high school that's like influential. It was the same for me, like Catcher in the Rye. I think we read A Clockwork Orange in high school too, which was also really so, yeah.
Maybe you've already answered it, but the name of the podcast is the Chills at Will podcast. It's this idea of those lines, those passages that give you chills at will, the ones that you remember and summon forth almost. Can you think of any writers in particular, any books, any comic books, anything that you've read that gave you those chills at will? Thrilling type of work.
the first thing that popped into my head is that there's in the Frank Miller run of the Dark Knight, comic, there's a moment where he's fighting the mutant leader, who's like this leader of this like crazy futuristic gang, and Batman's old, and it's the second time they fight. The first time he gets his butt kicked by this leader, and the second time he's fighting him, he's realizing that he's not going to be able to just do the things that he normally would. He has to be a little bit smarter, and they're fighting in this like mud pit, and he goes, this isn't a mud pit, this is an operating table, and I'm the surgeon. And reading that, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Batman's so cool. Anyway, that's fine.
That's a great line.
Yeah.
That's a great line. And
Wow,
Megan,
yes, he did not prep that. He pulled that. I'm pretty
well, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's like, somewhere there on the tip of your brain, if that's even a phrase. I just made that up maybe. But
no, you're right. You're right.
Do you have one of those?
I don't know if I do. I don't think I could pull it that quickly like that. So
that's all right. And so Megan, you grew up in the Midwest, Cleveland, yes. Cleveland, Ohio. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what was, what were you reading? What were you into as a kid, as an adolescent? What was really thrilling you in those days?
Well, I was a huge sports fan. I still am a sports fan, and we just watched the Browns clinch a playoff berth after 18 years.
It's been 18 years? Oh,
18
man.
18 years. Drought is over. And it relates because I read a lot of sports stuff, and I collected baseball cards and football cards, and I was very into just reading about the history of the sports, and I was kind of obsessed, probably until college, when I moved away from Ohio. And I think the Indians made it to I know they are changing their name, but they were called the Indians at the time, and they made it to the World Series, and I was the only one cheering for them. So I'm like, oh gosh, okay.
The only one in your family, you mean, or?
No, like the only one at school. I went to school in Boston.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's like Red Sox Central. So anyway, yeah. So I was reading a lot of sports stuff, but I read everything. I started reading pretty early, and sort of like the Maya and the Bee thing. My parents always said I always had a book with me, and they definitely promoted that, but they would be like, Megan, it's time to eat. You have to put the book down.
Right. So, were you reading biographies of athletes? Were you reading about sports in general, like a history of baseball? Like what kind of sports books were you reading?
Yeah, I did. I read a lot about like the early, foundation of how baseball or football started, or like biographies of like Babe Ruth, or, so I really like that stuff. They're really sports stories can be very inspirational. I still find them very motivational to me, no matter what I'm doing.
Sure.
Didn't we just watch something like a sports movie that was like, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot.
We watched the Michael Jordan documentary. That was.
Oh yeah, the Michael Jordan documentary was really good. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just find them very motivational for whatever I'm doing. Yeah. I know it's weird, but
one of my favorite athletes was Kenny Lofton.
Oh my gosh, Kenny Lofton. Yes.
Two-sport star. Have you played basketball, I think, at the University of Arizona?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right? Fast as all heck. Yeah. I was a big fan.
Why were you interested in Kenny Lofton?
Well, I'm a Dodgers fan, which I'm happy to say as they won the World Series this year. But I just love Kenny Lofton. I love the later days of like Ricky Henderson, those guys who remember when people used to steal bases? Doesn't happen anymore. But I just loved his speed and the fact he was I think he was a great fielder as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, he was, he played for Cleveland for a while.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, actually that just reminds me of that story Moneyball. They talk a lot about like why stealing bases is not really ineffective. Right. Which is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, it was so thrilling to watch him steal a base, or he's just so fast. So
that's cool. So Cleveland, I know it's a big sports town. And you were in Boston. Was that for college you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you study in college?
So I actually studied broadcast journalism, and thought about being a sports reporter for a while. And then I got a business degree afterwards at Boston University.
Okay. Really good, but just a little different tack you took there.
Yeah, a little different.
and Jorge, I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier or cut you off earlier. I was gonna ask, did in your family or on your own, did you read any of the great Colombian writers? Obviously, Marquez comes to mind.
Yeah.
How did that work with you? That's something you discovered on your own?
Yeah, no, I mean, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's books were all over the place. You know, they were in our shelves and everything, but also Isabel Allende and a lot of really influential, you know, writers. You know, I think that probably are in every, you know, Colombian or Central and South American household of a certain age.
Sure.
So those were always around, and I would pick them up. And I think, you know, honestly, with Gabriel Garcia Marquez as a kid, it's like daunting, right? And as you know, I'm bilingual and I'm fluent and I can read in both, but the language is real. Like for somebody that's not reading Spanish a lot, it's a little challenging. So it took me a couple of different tries to kind of get into that. It's funny because it's like, I think at around the same time that as I got older, I was like tackling that. And then I tried to tackle Lord of the Rings. And it's like, they both are equally dense texts to kind of engage with. But yeah, no, those were around. And I eventually got around to reading, you know, 1,000 Years in Solitude and The Time of Colorado. Those are amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, those are definitely around and influential. I think, you know, it's really hard to be Colombian from a certain, you know, from Barranquilla, from the northern coast of Colombia, and not be influenced by Gabriel Garcia Marquez's work, just culturally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was lucky to read Los Cinco Maestros in college, right? It was Juan Rufo from Mexico, Marquez, Borges. And I could remember there too. And Marquez just made an incredible impression on me. And I understood that when I did, like I've taught him in my English class before. I've taught like his collected stories. And there is just so much, like you said, there's so many biblical allusions and cultural allusions. And I'm sure, you know, language, you know, words that haven't been used since not that they haven't been used, but aren't in common.
Right.
So, you know, I can imagine it being tough for a native speaker. I know it was as a non-native speaker for sure. But I mean, just an incredible writer.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Yeah, no. And to this day, like super inspirational just now, even like I go back to it. Anyway. I'm
gonna put it out into the universe is that I would love to speak on this podcast with his son, who is a movie maker and I believe a writer as well. So
make it happen. Let it be so.
Crossing those fingers. And Jorge, a little about your studies. What did you study in college?
So I was drawing all the time. I knew that I went to, in South Florida, and they have magnet programs. And so I found out about it through an art teacher in elementary school, that there was an art middle school program. Okay. So I put together a portfolio with their help and applied and got into an art middle school. And then from there, they have a couple of art high schools in Miami, and I applied and got into design and architecture senior high. Okay. And then from there, it was just sort of like, you know, I guess I'm going to go on to art college. And so that, you know, we had this recruiting event where it's called Portfolio Day, with a bunch of schools come from different parts of the country. And ultimately I ended up going to Ringling College of Art and Design, which is in Sarasota, Florida, which is 3 hours away from Miami. And I studied illustration. And so it was like, it was one of those things where I was lucky that I knew from an early age that I wanted to sort of make a living as an illustrator or as an artist of some sort. And I knew that I wanted it to be, you know, that I wasn't really interested in sort of art for art's sake. It always had to have some sort of storytelling component to it. So then once I knew that, then it became clear sort of what path I wanted to take.
Okay. That was going to lead me to my next question, which is, you know, I mean, how do you study? You know, people talk about like, oh, I took an art history class, and they're like, I didn't really care that much. I want to do art. But you talk about illustrations, a combination of the drawing and storytelling. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. The storytelling component, you know, I think there's a couple of things that were going on. Frankly, it was like, as a kid, I'm like, I want to make money. You know, I'm like, I want to make money drawing. I think that's like sort of like the first step. And then once you start digging into that, you realize that, you know, there's the fine art world, which is like very conceptual and has its own set of rules, and craftsmanship may or may not matter at that point. It becomes more about the ideas that you're trying to convey, particularly the contemporary art world. And then there's sort of the commercial art space, which is like architecture, graphic design, photography, fashion design, which has a practical application to it. So I gravitated towards that practical angle at first.
Sure.
And then as time went on, I realized that there was certain things that I wanted to say, and that illustration then became very attractive to me, which is why I ended up majoring in it at Ringling, because it does help you find a way to visualize these ideas that are typically, the illustration tradition comes from the one that I studied under is very much an editorial illustration tradition. So that what that means is that it's an old school New York magazine newspaper world where you would be given an article that you would illustrate an illustration for, or an idea that you're trying to convey, and you have like a short, really crazy deadline, and you have this one idea you have to get across through an image, and they're hoping that you come up with something cool and different to help so that it sticks in the reader's mind. And so then that was sort of what I did for 4 years, was sort of getting my craft up, and then also tackling this idea of how do you visually represent some of these ideas.
Sure.
And then I throw in there the fact that I always was interested in film and television, and I knew that I wanted to kind of do visual development in some way, which is sort of, doing drawings and things in support of a show or a movie. And so I kind of taught myself some of that while I was at Ringling. It wasn't, at the time, there wasn't a program. So I threw some of those assignments in there in my portfolio, and I was lucky enough to get a job right out of school doing that at American Greetings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Going back a little bit, as far as representation, did you feel seen? Did you feel, your culture, your subculture, your, all the things that make us all up? Did you feel like you saw yourself in what you read and what you saw on TV and movies?
Oh no, that's easy.
No period. No period.
No.
Oh no.
No, for sure. No, I think it's like, we talk about this a lot. It seems like there was like a period of time, maybe in like 70s and 80s or something, where there was like, I was reading a lot of books that seemed to have a lot of diversity in them, and there was a lot of representation in picture books and things. And now it was fairly US space and fairly vague, and it just seemed like there was just a lot of different types of people in books in terms of illustrations or whatever, and content. Even if you think back to Sesame Street, its origins. But then over time, things sort of began to not feel diverse. It felt very homogenous in a way. And so growing up, I wasn't seeing any of that. I mean, I think I talk about this a lot. There was a moment where I was, I always loved hanging out at my cousin's house. It was always fun to sleep over. That was like the big thing. Like if I got to sleep over, because then I could get, like, my aunt would make French toast, which is awesome. Nice. So I'd go over to their house, and we'd get up in the morning, and we watch like either Saturday morning cartoons or Sunday morning shows. And Saturday morning was like coveted because it had all the cool animated shows. But then Sunday was sort of, in South Florida, was where they would dump all the like stuff that was just the cheapest to air, that they didn't have to pay a lot of money for, which tended to be B movies or at certain days it would run a marathon of like Godzilla movies, and that was awesome. And I was always like, this is the coolest. But then as I would get it, I'd really get excited about it. But then there was like, I realized like, hey, there's no shows that look like my cousins, that look like our family, look like anybody. It's always, either crazy Japanese stories of giant monsters, or just your typical stuff that you're seeing in the US. So no, definitely didn't see any representation. In fact, it's taken this long for there to be sort of any representation that seems meaningful, that carries quality or any weight behind it. So that's great. It's great to see it moving in that direction now. But yeah. So
in getting into literature and art, I mean, did you feel like that was a conscious decision to kind of change that representation, or it was kind of more subconscious?
I think it was conscious for me in college. Like my thesis was a project that sort of it was a book project, and I was hoping to combine all those things, my upbringing, cultural elements into a story. So at that point it became conscious. I think maybe throughout my adolescence and up till then it was bubbling subconsciously. But once that became apparent and I put together this book, I was like, oh yeah, this is sort of what I want to do.
Megan, I know you were saying, having some trouble coming up with the chill will line, which is totally understandable. Who were some of those authors, those writers that really stood out to you, or continue to stand out to you? It doesn't have to be someone when you were a kid. It could be something, today.
Well, when I was a kid, I mean, I loved Judy Blume. I mean, a lot of these things are probably, I don't know, stereotypical, but I love her. I feel like she captures, at least for me, like growing up in a very realistic way that, I don't see too many other places. So, I mean, I love her. I love books like The Phantom Toll Booth because they were just so creative and different and funny. Let me think what else. I also know this is kind of maybe controversial, but I love Paulo Coelho. It's something we've talked about. I love The Alchemist. Just it's such a simple yet very profound story to me anyway. We're reading a lot about the Stoics recently.
Okay.
Jorge got this big book of Stoicism. And you've been reading them like the past year or something, and now I'm reading them. So we talk a lot about Stoicism.
You said your son is 8 years old?
Yes, he's 8.
All right, so let's get him on that, okay? He needs to be reading about the Stoics as well, right? I mean, what are we waiting for?
He's probably getting some of it through osmosis.
He probably is, yeah. Because we talk about he probably would like it because, if we were reading it to him, because you were reading this book about like strategy.
Oh wow! Okay.
I got it at the airport. We were flying.
This was like a year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. I bought it it's called like Strategies and Tactics, and it's written by a former Navy SEAL. And I was like, this is the perfect book to get him to fall asleep. So I'm like, I'm gonna start reading this out loud, and you're gonna let me know what you think. And I'm reading it, and he's just not falling asleep, and he's asking questions, and I'm like, oh man,
backfired a little bit. Oh no.
Yeah. So he could surprise us.
Oh no. Well, let's turn literally and figuratively to.
Yes.
Zombies Don't Eat Veggies. It's created and it has your names on it. Isn't that crazy?
I think we had to pay people to do that, didn't we?
Right? No. What's the background on the book Zombies Don't Eat Veggies? How did it come about? How long in the making? It was published in 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like it was it's been in the making for a while, and I think so we met at American Greetings.
Okay.
That's where we met, and that's where we were working together. And you asked Jorge about representation, and that's where he first. So we were both working on established brands like Care Bears and things like that, but we also had to pitch new shows, and like every month we had to have these pitch sessions. And part of it was, so I was a writer, he was an illustrator, and we had to pair up at one point. I think after a couple pitch sessions, it was like the writer should pair up with the artists, and I think we paired up.
Yeah.
Or we were working on something.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how there were wonderful pitches, but certainly none of them really featured Latinx characters in the leads, and how you really wanted that and the importance of it. And we talked at length about it, and I was like, yes, why don't we have that? And I want to help you do that. So I think I feel like it sparked there.
Mm-hmm.
And then later we got married, and we were still talking about different projects we wanted to work on, and we had a son, and obviously he's a mix of both of us. And we introduced books right away on day one, and there just were very few books that felt like they, like, one, appealed to us, and two, that were featuring English and Spanish, unless they were very, I don't know, help me, like dry.
Yeah, no, I think the books tend to be like very not fun. I don't know. I think like we're very silly, and we're very goofy, and our son, kids love to laugh, and and a lot of we're trying to find ways to get him excited about reading and about books. And some of the Spanish books that we would get, there was like a great book that's all just purely in Spanish that I got from my cousin, that's about his grandfather, un abuelo sí.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was really a beautiful book, and I love it. I mean, after like the 100th time reading that same book over and over again, you're just sort of like, oh man, there's not much. And then I think for a while there, anyway, there was a lot of books that we were sort of cycling through, and then we found Niño by Yuji Morales, and it was like, oh, this is like, it's got some cool stuff going on, and it's got some cultural Mexican cultural elements in it that were really fun and cool, and it felt like that felt good, and he liked that. But it was just nothing. So we were like, okay, maybe we can do something here. And I think it didn't necessarily start that way. I think it started off with just the concept of,
I wanted to write a zombie book.
Yeah, you were like, let's do something with a zombie. And I was like, yes.
Well, because, like we, we're very observant people, and we just saw like Walking Dead was a huge show. I mean, I guess it still is, but it was really sort of at the height of, everyone was talking about Walking Dead, and that was trickling down to kids. Not that they were watching Walking Dead, hopefully, but they were talking about zombies, because I'm sure they heard their parents say the word zombie. So we would go to a playground and there's like little 2-year-olds running around playing Zombie Apocalypse, having, no real idea what they were really, they didn't really know what a zombie was, but the idea was intriguing. And I'm like, what a way to, I feel like we need to write a zombie book that's, and also like our son, even from really young, like liked scary things. And so it was always sort of this, okay, how do we find things that appeal to him, but that are, way above his, emotional understanding right now. It can't be too scary. So it kind of came from, how can we create this safe zombie book that's also going to appeal to, things that we were interested in.
Right. Yeah. So, and it sort of became an opportunity to put all the things that we wanted to see into the project. So as it evolved, we were like, oh, well, what started off as just, generic zombies became very specific zombies. And then we started talking about the things with the language and the Spanglish, and really wanting to amplify that and make it more evident. Then we started talking about the food, and it just sort of like, we just sort of use it as a vessel to put all those things that we really wanted to see in the books. And so that's sort of how it evolved. So then Megan wrote the manuscript. I did we
worked together.
Well, we write together. We do everything sort of together. Like, she definitely influences my illustrations, has notes on them. I have notes on the writing, but we delete
many notes.
many notes. But I really I like emphasizing the fact that, like, at the end of the day, you're the keeper of the manuscript and I'm the keeper of the art. So that like there's clear division there. You have clear, at the end of the day, you make the final call on the writing and I'll make the final call on the art. So
the stamp.
So I mean, I did a dummy, so it's like a rough version of the book is what they call it. And so then I illustrated that, and then I took it to a writing conference. I showed it to a bunch of people, and we were really excited about it. Got a lot of great feedback, and then life got in the way. We were busy with some stuff. We started a business, and we were sort of like busy with that. And finally, we realized we needed to get an agent involved, somebody who can help us, because we were trying to sort of pitch it on our own. And agents are incredibly useful. That's their full-time job, unless you're willing to make that your full-time job. It's always highly recommend you get a credible agent. So we were really lucky that we were contacted by our first Molly Cusick, who was an agent at the time. She has since left agenting, and she said, hey, I have it, but before I leave agenting, I wanted you to know that there's another agent in my firm that's really loves your book. And it turned out to be her husband. So
okay.
John,
keep it in the family. Oh,
yeah,
nice.
exactly. And he's been awesome. So
oh man. Well, I love the fact that it's Spanglish. I think Spanglish is one of the 7 wonders of the world. Make it 8, right? how did you choose where to put the Spanish, where to put the English? Like, how did you choose to do it in Spanglish? Not all Spanish, all English in certain parts. How did the Spanglish idea come about?
Well, a part of it is because, so I'm not a Spanish speaker. I understand more after being married to Jorge and spending a lot of time with his family, but I'm not a Spanish speaker. But I try, and I think a lot of it came from, wanting it to, and we know there's a lot of families like ours that, so like he'll say something, and I'll try to, talk back with not a full Spanish sentence, but like the words that I know or the phrases. And, and to do my best that way, especially like when we spend time with his parents. And so, I mean, it's a mess. I'm very uncomfortable with it, but I'm trying. And so we felt like, well, that would be fun to see in a book. And also that it would help kids like our son or kids that are trying to learn how to speak Spanish to sort of see them integrated. Because how did we see, how do we decide on the words where it's like, basically, how are they going to be able to pick up words contextually?
Sure.
Without, you'll notice there's no, like the translation's not in there of the Spanish words. And that was intentional for sure. Trying to get those contextually in there. And then a lot of it was like, food is a big part of the book. And so putting our like favorite Latin foods and puns in there, we just thought was really funny.
Yeah. I think also it had to feel, I was able, I think growing up in South Florida, it's like, Spanglish land. It's like everyone speaks Spanglish, some form of it, even if you're casually speaking Spanish, there will be a ton of English words, or even if you're casually speaking English, you're going to use a bunch of Spanish words depending on where you're at. So that it was fairly easy for me to find and say, this is where it would feel organic to use these words, and this is where it wouldn't necessarily feel organic or natural, authentic. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I think
sorry not to, but I am cutting you off, but only because I think no, it's a good point, because like I would write something, and sometimes, you'd be like, okay, great, that works perfectly. And then sometimes you'd be like, no, like I would never say that or use that there in that way. So that is not going to work. Maybe this would work, or just we need to, it's not going to work in that sentence.
Right.
And so that was like a big part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, there's some great puns in there for sure.
Good, thank you.
I have to hesitate to like stop and be like, talk to my kids and be like, let me explain this to you, let me tell you the full story and the context and the whole deal. I took a writing for children course in college, my senior year.
Oh, cool.
My last semester, I thought I would enjoy it, and I thought it'd be fairly laid back, and it was. But man, writing for children is hard. And fewer words, you have fewer chances to make an impression and such. How did you? And I always remember my professor saying something that's always stuck with me, where she said, a book has a barcode, right? Meaning, yes, it's art, yes, it's beauty, but you also want to try to sell it. Yeah. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that balance between the commercialism and the art of it.
You want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is hard. I think balancing act. I think every book, you would hope, is written by people who want to sell it, who want to reach as many people as possible, and it's just sort of a matter of whether there's an audience there for that type of book. And oftentimes you don't know until you do it, so it's very difficult. I think for us, we always believed in the story once we arrived in it and put energy into it. I think we also sort of, because of our background in entertainment, and I worked in video games, Megan worked in toys and animation, I think we sort of have a gut feeling about what kids like and what's going to work in the market, in various markets. And really, to Megan's credit, like she does a lot of research into the markets, and so it's like a lot of reading picture books, a lot of seeing what's out there, a lot of analysis. And I think we just decided that, we saw that there was a bit of a need there, in the sense of there not being really any funny books that had Latinx characters in it. And so then we just went for it at that point. But yeah, I think it's something that we think about a lot, because as we go through we have another book coming out next in 2022 at this point. Yeah. That I'm starting to illustrate. That was a factor in our second book. And then in other books that we're working on right now and developing, it's like, we're always sort of measuring it up between like, well, my heart feels like this would be really a great book, but then like you have to kind of throw it up against the spread of other books out there, and where it can potentially hit, and what's really how commercially viable is it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because maybe this is just it is just our opinion, but we hear a lot of parents and teachers and librarians talking a lot about how do you get kids reading, how do you get them reading more, and I don't hear a lot of people saying, well, how do you make the books more interesting? Which I think is a big issue, because there's so much competing for kids' attention now with, with streaming stuff, with TV, with video games, like it's everywhere. But I don't think it's fair to blame kids for wanting to watch or do those kinds of things if they're more interesting. So our big attempt with this book too was to appeal to kids' interests. And like we were saying, we really do see lots of kids playing Zombie Apocalypse and being interested in zombies. And we said, well, okay, so how can we sort of appeal to them with the cover and, and make it funny and interesting and hook them so that they want to read the story and hopefully read more after that. And I don't, again, it's sort of, I don't know if it's talked about enough. I do feel like we need to be thinking about that more with books. It's just, there's just too much out there that's competing. So they have to be, we can't just keep doing the same thing. We have to do different things to appeal to kids because reading is still essential and important. And they will read when there's a story that they're interested in.
No doubt about it. So are you trying to build an army of devoted vegetarians with the book?
Are we?
Yeah, I don't know about an army. No, I think
a horde.
Zombie. No, I think we love vegetables. I think vegetables are awesome. I think there's a part of me that's always shocked. I don't know, surprised when I see an adult say like, "Oh, I hate vegetables." I'm just sort of like, "Really?"
Right.
No, okay. I mean, hey,
there's a lot.
It's like that's cool. I just can't help but be like, "What?" But so yeah, I mean, I think we just wanted to be like. I mean, first of all, it's obviously the funny inversion of the whole thing, of like, the parents don't want the vegetables, but the kid does. And frankly, it's just sort of like, they're fun to draw. Vegetables are really fun to draw.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think those things, if we inadvertently create an army of vegetarians, then that would be great, but that's not necessarily the goal, the point.
Well, I mean, we have a very picky eater,
That's
true. And he always has been.
You're preaching to the choir here. Jeez.
Are your kids picky?
Oh yeah. Well, one of the two, yes.
One is.
Yeah.
I always get a little bit like when I hear a parent like, "Oh, I made this, very complicated dish," and they always eat all of it. And I'm like, what is that like?
What does that even mean? Yes. Right.
So he was not interested in vegetables. He's gotten better, but that was also, how to make them more appealing. And that was actually part of what went into the book too. He was at a Montessori school when he was younger, and they did this whole sort of like unit, I guess, on where we were in California at the time, so it was easier to do throughout the year, but they had a garden and they grew vegetables, and the kids were, involved. And then when their harvest came in, then they got to try everything. And he actually tried like bell pepper for the first time and something else that they grew. I can't remember what it was, but we were like shocked because he would just, totally turn away from those things. But because he had a part of it,
sure,
and was able to see sort of the beauty of growing something and harvesting it and being part of it, he was more apt to try it. So we want that went into the character of Mo, our main character, of just being, loving vegetables so much for the completeness of what a vegetable is.
I don't know if you were paying attention to the beautiful cesspool that is Twitter today, but I'm thinking of some joke about, do you guys make your son open the canned vegetables on his own or something like that? I don't know if you heard about the story of the man who forced his son his daughter came up to him basically and said, I want to eat. He said, there's some baked beans over there. And it's like a, 10 or 12 tweet thread about how he made her figure it out, read the directions, how to use a can opener. And apparently 6 hours later, she finally ate the baked beans. Yeah. I don't know how well I'm describing it, but anyway.
How old was the kid?
I want to say 9.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah. Take a look at it later, unless you unless you don't want to get sucked into, again, the beautiful cesspool of Twitter.
Now I'm curious. So.
Better than Twitter is your book. And good transition, right? And obviously from the title it says Zombies Don't Eat Veggies. I feel like maybe I should have given a little background, is that the kid is in a family, the Romero family, who they're zombies. They don't eat vegetables. And he has his little secret garden and he's growing them and he tries to, bring veggies into the mix. I wonder how much when you're either, speaking to your son about the book, speaking to other kids who read the book, or just working with the book in general, about not preaching too much. In reading this book to my kids, I was like, oh yeah, at the end when he says it's okay to be different, I almost felt like I was going too far. Yeah, it's okay to be different and blah blah blah, and they maybe lose interest there. You know what I mean? As far as like, how do you avoid kind of hitting them over the head with the message and also kind of subconsciously throwing it out there?
That's a good
about
point.
It's okay to be yourself, etc.
I think for us, the message always has to feel authentic and somewhat earned, or relevant to us.
Sure.
So I think that helps in not going too far. I think I know I find myself being really heavy-handed when it's like, I'm trying to, you know, it's usually like right after Kai's done something wrong or that I perceive as being wrong. And I'm trying to show him the correct way, that I go overboard in my like, that is why you never, I don't know,
right,
handle a knife. I don't know. He hasn't done that.
No.
But
He's never done that.
Cross those fingers. Cross those fingers.
Yeah,
knock
exactly.
on wood. Knock on madera. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Knock on wood. But I think that's when I'm like trying. It's like when you're conscious of it, then you tend to be preacher. Whereas I think if it's for us, it was thoughtfully woven into the story that I think because it also evolved over time. And I think once we got to that point with our editor, it just was like, you know, I think Megan did a really beautiful job of like knowing when to stop and when to sort of restrain with the words and the writing at that particular point. And she also understood that like that would be an opportunity. In this book, it's like a moment where he finally says like, no, it's like I'm different. And then you have a page turn. So it's a little bit of a cliffhanger. It's like, how's it going to go? And then when you turn, it's sort of like a recap of like, but I'm still me. I'm still part of this family. I'm still somebody, you know, that I'm not like of another, you know, right? And I think that part was, I think, really important for it to fall on that page turn and for it to emphasize that, so that it doesn't get too preachy. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool for you to say that. I mean, I just read it to my kids for the third time, maybe 20 minutes before we started. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with that page turn. It is a cliffhanger. Yeah. It is like, ooh, how are they going to respond? Yeah. You know, my kids love how when they tried the gazpacho, which was disguised as, well, the other way around, the blood soup, the blood bisque, which, you know, with the gazpacho is how the mom's, you know, like her head comes out, I think. The father's eyes pop out. They love that part, right? But I was trying to be like, I was trying to be not too heavy-handed, like you said, you know, it's okay to be different. But there was that great cliffhanger that really, like, they're okay. They accept them. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You have the book with you. I wonder if you might read a part of it.
Sure.
The beginning, the end, anywhere in the middle, just so the listeners can get an idea of what the book's all about.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you want to read it like how we usually do? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, just a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we could start with this page?
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. So this is like the third page. So usually when we're doing like readings or events, so I read the narration and Jorge does all the voices.
Oh,
so
nice.
We'll do it that way.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. So Mo's mom and dad did not love vegetables. Not one bit. Veggies were yucky, disgusting, fiasco. They were not allowed at the Romero's dinner table.
And Mo's dad's reading a book called Endurance Training for Zombies, and he turns over to his son and he says, "Ready to chase some humans in the marathon next week, mijo?"
Zombies were supposed to eat zombie cuisine, like brain cakes, brain stew, and brain and bean tortillas. Mo's parents insisted that their niño eat only zombie food.
Now, Mo's mom shows up with a really gross bowl of food and she goes, "Finger foods, mi amor?" And Mo looks up kind of very sketchy and he says, "Gracias, I'm not hungry."
Do one more page?
Sure.
Okay. Mo tried to convince his mom and dad to give peas a chance. He sneaked in vegetables wherever he could.
So Mo's holding up a straw, almost like like a scarecrow that he's made with a head of lettuce.
Mm-hmm.
The mom's, he's presenting a bunch of, you know, breads and things and corn to the mom, and she goes, "Grains?" And finally, he tries to show off a book, and it's called "Eating Vegetables" by Jonathan Safran Gore.
Well, thank you. It's so great to hear the writers and illustrators themselves read it and explain it. That's awesome. I knew there was something there with the Jonathan Safran. I haven't read, but I know there's a Jonathan, I think it's Safran Foer, Foer, something like that.
Yes.
That was great. And
he wrote a book called Eating
Animals.
Eating Animals. That's right. And it was like very like eye-opening. It's about like sort of the processed meat industry in the United States. It's pretty great. Yeah.
So that works perfectly. Right? And I love the give peas a chance.
Yeah.
That was a great one. I was thinking it had something to do with a separate peas, but it was give peas a chance. That's awesome.
Yep.
And so obviously I know Amazon has it. do you guys have any favorite, maybe like local booksellers or smaller booksellers who from where you could buy Zombies Don't Eat Veggies as well?
Well, we always suggest Bookshop because
Bookshop.
you can select your local bookstore. So IndieBound or Bookshop, you can select your local bookstore wherever you are
Okay.
and buy it through like Big Bookshop basically helps you do that.
Okay.
We're in Montreal. I don't know if they have it on stock right now, but you can buy it online from Drawn and Quarterly, which is a really great bookstore here in Montreal.
Okay.
I mean, it's available everywhere, Barnes and Noble, pretty much everywhere. And our publisher is Lee and Low. So you could buy directly from Lee and Low as well, which is always great. They're a really great multicultural book seller or publisher.
Nice. Oh, and then also I would just shout out to like Blue Willow Books in Houston.
Yes.
There's just like a really wonderful bookstore we love. We did a reading there, and
Mrs. Dalloway's.
Mrs. Dalloway's, that's right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
How did it feel the first time you got that finished book and saw your names on the cover?
How did it feel? Well, interestingly, we got the final actual book after other people did because something happened with the shipment. So we get free author copies. Mm-hmm. There tends to be like an unboxing video that people will do, but we didn't get ours for like 3 weeks after. I forget why. Right. Yeah, the first shipment got lost or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of strange because we were getting like pictures from our friends or people, with their holding it up. We're like, that's so great. I wonder. But it was pretty cool. It was, I think something that we've been working together for a long time, and books just have a very special place in our hearts. So I think to see it come together, knowing how much work we put into it, and was very, very gratifying. It's definitely the most gratifying thing that I've done.
Yeah, me too. I think there's something very, I think when you're like one of the, I don't know, the both of us, we're pretty interested in like what our next project's going to be. And we want to like get the next thing. And there's this, I think in this case, we made a conscious choice to like really savor the moment and be like, this is something we did and not move on from it too quickly. And so it's been great to see the reaction too, because that's also helped sort of keep us in that moment of like gratitude. I know I'm always like, I'm so glad that you have that copy and that you're talking to us about it. I'm very cool. Genuinely excited and humbled every time like a friend of ours will buy a copy for their kid or they send us a picture of it. It's a very sincere book in that sense, and that we've been blown away that people have received it in the same spirit that we put it out there. So that's been really great.
My mom was a first and second grade teacher for years.
Oh, wow.
And and my inspiration for sure. And she told me about Storyline Online a long time ago. And since I have kids, and especially with the pandemic, we've done some of the Zoom with grandma, and we do the Storyline Online. So you guys have Jaime Camil. Well, I say you guys. Were you guys responsible for that? Storyline Online, you have actors, etc., and they read the piece. I want to say 870,000 views in Spanish, and possibly over 1 million in English.
It's over 2 million now.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How did that go? Was that totally random? Did you guys have any say in that matter?
So, no. It was one. It was one of those things where we got an email from our editor one day, or from our publisher.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, "Oh, we're happy to let you know that next month, your book has been selected to be featured on Storyline Online." Now it's so strange because I think like years before we'd seen we'd stumbled on Storyline Online, and we're like, it'd be so cool to get a book on here one day. I said out loud to myself, basically. But
it was the Oprah one.
It was the Oprah one. That's right.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily do anything to push that. As it turns out, Lee and Low Books has a relationship with Storyline Online. They have selected several of their books in the past. But apparently, from what we understand, the process is up to, I think, the reader. The actor that they choose gets to choose the book.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure if it's like a selection of books that they were presented to him that he chose ours, or if it was already pre-selected by the time it got to Jaime. But it was really strange because it was happening sort of right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was this like kind of combination of like excitement and like kind of like what's going to happen and how's this going to,
right.
But it ended up working really like in our favor because a lot of kids were home and it ended up reaching a lot of kids as a result of that. So it was really amazing. And he did such an amazing job with
it. He did.
Too. It's so good.
Yeah, I think we were like, it was right because Kai was out of school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were also looking for things, and we were also kind of, we were all in this tiny little temporary apartment, just to give you a little clue of it. Because we moved to Montreal last November. And we were in like corporate housing, and then we had been looking for a place and we couldn't really find a place that felt like a good fit for us. And so we were basically signed this like 3-month lease on a tiny little furnished place so that Kai could keep going to his school. And 2 weeks after that, everything hit. And so we were all home. We're all working and going to school at home in this tiny little place. And then we got this email and we were just like, what? Like, how could this be happening? And it was just very exciting. And then we were kind of on edge, I think, waiting to see how it was going to turn out. And when we finally saw it, and we started, because like Jaime did a lot of promotional.
Oh yeah, that was really cool. My mom called me and she was like, I just saw your book on Univision. And I was like, what?
Oh, wow.
So they did a promo for it. And that was really cool because, I don't know, as a kid growing up in South Florida, Hispanic and Latinx parents, like they're watching Univision or Telemundo. And so that was like huge.
Then it was like legit.
Yeah.
So it was pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm listening to it. And I'm like, hey, that's the guy who does the Toyota commercial. I think it's Toyota on the commercials for the novellas, right?
Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
Have you had any interaction with him? Any communication with him?
No, we haven't, but we need to. I'd love to send them a note. I just, we never really were in direct contact with them or any of the people. I'm sure we could send them a note.
We've had like on Twitter, but I don't know if it's like his people. Like we've sent some messages that, he's responded to, but I don't know if it's Jaime or not. But yes, we, when this is all over or something, we'd love to be able to like, I don't know, meet or something. It would be because cool. he really did do a wonderful job. Like I can't imagine anyone doing a better job with it. So really.
Balance and compliments. You guys are compliments to each other seem to be some of the key words of this interview. How does it work for two writers, two creatives, two artists to like on a daily basis? The schedule, you got the little guy. I mean, how does that all work?
Yeah.
Flawlessly. Just flawlessly.
In a word, flawlessly. Okay, next question.
No problem.
No, I think, balance is, I think, I had a question like this before. And I think one of the things that always sticks out in my mind is that like, I deeply respect Megan and what she does as a writer and as a person. So I think that when you start from a place of respect, that tends to sort out a lot of things, right? Because then it's like, it sort of forces you to not do stupid things because it's somebody that you deeply respect and care about. So I think that like from a life and creative standpoint, we also communicate, endeavor to communicate as often as we can, like where we're at, like just emotionally and mentally. So I know that I can be very idea driven, so I can have like a bunch of ideas. All of a sudden I come out of the shower and I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to do this and this, and I'll kind of be like, hey, I have some things that I would like to talk to. Are you okay with that? And Megan will say, sure, give me 10 minutes or something. Or she'll say, no, I'm not really, I'm tired. I'm not really in a headspace for that. And then it's up to me. And then I go, okay, cool. That's because, you're very good about being like, I'm good. And you're different, you're more introverted and you have a different thought process. And I think over the years, I also attribute it to the fact that we were sort of collaborating together in a work environment before we were married. And so then that sort of established the patterns that we sort of continue to have today. I don't know. What do you think? Any other?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. I mean, there's nobody I respect more than this guy. So it's both, I think that does make it a lot easier to, to work together. It also can make it hard sometimes when like, I spend however long on something and then I show him and if he's like, it's not there yet, or this doesn't make sense, it can be like, you know, because I know he's right. And so that can be hard. And I know you asked like about our son. Like, I do think we're all kind of one big mishmash of like, you know, some days we're not talking about anything story related, but most days we are. And it can kind of start with breakfast, even on like both Jorge and Kai, I think, are both like more extroverted thinkers. So it's like talking and this and what about that, about this. And I'm kind of like a processor. So sometimes I'm like, just, I don't know. Give me a moment. And it can kind of bleed through to, you know, to the end of the day. But on the other hand, you know, a lot of people who work together will say, you know, you have to have really clear boundaries around this is work time and this is this time. That doesn't really work for us either. It really is more like being able to speak up for yourself. Like, you know, like you said, like, I can't really do this right now. I don't have the energy for like creative stuff, you know, or sometimes because like Jorge works a full-time job, I'm consulting and Kai's going to school. So, you know, sometimes it can be after like a really busy week, like actually we need to make time for this on Saturday, you know, like we need to find a way for us as a family to get this stuff done. So I think Kai is very involved in what we do.
I mean, I like to think that we do cool, fun things. So we try to get his opinion and thoughts on it. And sometimes he thinks it's cool, sometimes he doesn't, and checks out. It's like, okay, that's fine. But we're trying to bring him in as much as we can. I think that helps as well. So he always has a beat on what we're doing and isn't like totally left out or something. And I think that helps. But it's hard. It's an ongoing struggle because especially with working from home now, you know, creating space for ourselves and as individuals is also really important. So we're working on that, you know, ongoing.
Yes.
Congratulations, first of all, on the book coming out next year.
Oh, thank you.
It took me a minute when you said 2022. I'm like, okay, that's 2 years. Nope, it's next year.
I know.
So that kind of goes with the general question about what are you working on? What's coming up in the future?
So we just submitted the rough dummy for our next book. Can I say that?
Is the title a secret or?
It hasn't been officially announced, but they said we could talk about it. So
whatever works.
Yeah, well, right now it's called The Wild Ones.
Okay.
And you were talking, so go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's a book about it sort of continues. It's with Lee and Low Books again. It's part of our 2-book deal with them. Nice. We really wanted to sort of continue on some of the same themes, but kind of expanded a little bit. So this is about a group of kids who grew up in this apartment building that gets bought out by a ruthless developer that's going to tear it down. And so then the kids rally. It turns out these kids are like super monster fans. They love monsters and they believe that there's a monster that lives in a nearby forest. And so they all gather together and they go out into the woods to try to get the monster to come help them scare off the developers. And so that's sort of the story.
Cool. You said ruthless. You said ruthless?
Ruthless.
Oh, okay.
Ruthless works as well.
Okay.
For this story.
Is this like a morality tale of like gentrification, or is this something more?
Well, no, I think gentrification is a thing that we really wanted to talk about. I think in this book we wanted to at least hit on it and as a subject and the theme. And I think it's also about the communities of friendships that can build up around different groups of people. So that's another aspect.
Oh, that sounds really cool.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it because it's a picture book, but we are thinking about it as an early introduction to graphic novels. I mean, early, you know, sounds like you're also a comic book person or at least pretty knowledgeable about comic books, and they were a big influence on somewhat. Yeah. I think especially even more so now, like they can draw kids into reading, especially reluctant readers. And so we're designing it with that in mind. And then the idea of, you know, we're talking about like 80s, how in the 80s, it felt like there was a time where, I don't know about representation as much, but maybe, you know, it wasn't all white people. It didn't feel like, at least, that there were on movies and things like that. There were diverse groups of kids for some movies that we watched that we loved, like Goonies. there's some stereotypical stuff. When we watched it again, we're like, oh, that's
it's pretty cringeworthy now in some ways.
There's some stuff in there. It's not so great. But the idea of kids kind of being on their own to solve a very big problem is something that really appeals to us. And then like we've moved a lot, but we lived in San Francisco or the San Francisco area, Boston, New York, and gentrification is definitely a big thing.
It's a common theme. It comes up over and over again, and it affects predominantly, lower income communities and folks. And so it's a real thing. It's a real And it sort of sets a backdrop to the story too. It's not necessarily the main point. It's it sets the gears in motion, and it gives us a ticking clock.
Yes.
Well, my daughter will love it. She's all about the proverbial war between adults and kids.
Yes.
Girls rule, girls boy. She loves that kind of stuff. So the idea of you having kids, she'll be 5 in a couple months. Yeah.
Okay.
But you talk about comic books kind of being the gateway drug for readers. And as a teacher, I found that to be definitely true.
Okay.
I think of like Persepolis, the graphic novel,
yes.
The Watchmen, etc. So for sure. And I look forward to maybe teaching that in my classroom. And I don't teach little kids. I teach sophomore, junior high school English, but I always do green eggs and ham when we do allegory, right?
Right.
They love going back in time, reading that, showing the pictures to everybody. So the wild ones maybe will make it into the list, and we can talk about some of these bigger themes.
That would be cool.
Yeah,
that would be very cool.
That's cool. That's cool. I want to thank you so much. I'll be sure on the episode notes and everything to give all the links to your personal websites, to where you can buy Zombies Don't Eat Veggies, for the YouTube, the Storyline Online, etc. And it's just really been a pleasure talking to you. I thank you for your work and really admire your work, the fact that you're able to do so with children, as I know very well. So thanks again for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having us, Pete. It's been really a great chatting. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The pleasure is mine. I'm gonna read us out here. And again, thank you everyone for listening to episode 34, listening and watching to episode 34 of the Chills at Will podcast with Jorge and Megan Lacera. You can now subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Please leave me a 5-star review. You can also ask for the podcast by name using Alexa and find it on Spotify. You can follow me on Instagram where I'm at Chills at Will Podcast, or on Twitter where I'm at Chills at Will PO1. This is a passion project of mine, a DIY operation, and I'd love for your help in promoting what I'm convinced is a unique and spirit. Oh,
I'm
Alexa.
having trouble understanding right now.
Alexa, stop.
A little later.
See, it's just like they say at a wedding, 2 things are going to go wrong. There's going to be at least one thing that goes wrong. There's Alexa. I'd love for your help in promoting what I'm convinced is a unique and spirited look at an often ignored art form. The intro song for the Chills at Will podcast is Wind Down instrumental version. And the other great song played on the episode is Hoops instrumental by Matt Whitehour. Both songs are used through archesaudio.com. For now, thanks again for listening. And I hope that these quarantine days bring you texts by writers and illustrators with mad skills like Megan and Jorge Lacera, whose work gives you chills at will.